He came back from deployment with nothing left to come back to. Ryan used to joke that the hardest part of deployment was the boredom, not the danger, the boredom, the long, identical days. He said once, in a letter to his mother, that you spend most of your time looking forward to the specific details of ordinary life. A particular sandwich, a certain chair, the sound of traffic at a specific time of morning. He'd been with Caitlin for 3 years before he deployed. They'd talked seriously about what it would mean. She was the one who'd said, "It's 14 months out of a life we're building. I'll be here." She used that word, here. By month 4, she'd mostly stopped answering his calls. By month 6, she'd stopped calling entirely. In September, he got a message, short, written and rewritten until all the weight was gone, which only made the weight worse. She said she needed her own life. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped he understood. He read it in a brief window of connectivity. He read it 3 times. Then he put his phone away and went back to work because there was nothing else to do. He came home in December. Taxi from the base. No one to pick him up. 40 minutes of gray winter sky and bare trees and the beginning of sleet that hadn't decided yet if it wanted to be rain. The apartment looked the same from the street. He went upstairs. His key worked. Inside, the apartment had been emptied of her. Not of him. His things remained. But all of hers was gone. The blue lamp, the market print, the furniture she'd brought. Even the smell was different, the way a room smells when someone has stopped being in it. On the kitchen counter was an envelope. Inside, a letter written in her actual handwriting, on paper, which told him more about her than she probably intended. You write a letter on paper when you know what you're saying deserves that weight. She had met someone in May, month 3 of the deployment. She hadn't told him, had meant to. Time passed. She convinced herself he must have moved on too, or would understand. She said it wasn't about him. He folded the letter and put it back. He sat on his own couch and looked at the walls. He'd been sending money home. Not a lot. Enough. A contribution every month to the life they were supposedly maintaining together. She had kept accepting the transfers, right up until October when she moved out and the payment stopped, because the account was empty of her attention, if not his money. She had taken what was hers, left his, left the letter. Ryan told me this story on a night in February, 14 months after it happened. We were in a bar in the middle of a rainstorm that had turned the streets outside into something barely passable. 3rd drink, which was unusual for him. He wasn't angry when he told it. He'd moved through anger a long time ago. What he was by then was just tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has processed something so completely, it has become part of the structure of them. He said the thing that stayed with him wasn't the leaving. It was the word. Here. She had told him she would be here, and he had carried that word through 14 months of a deployment in the way you carry something you believe is true. He had used it as a fixed point when everything else was shifting. He had thought of it on the worst nights like coordinates, like a location he could navigate toward. He said it was strange to discover that the most solid thing you were holding was something that had already dissolved. Outside the bar, the rain kept going. He finished his drink. He said he was fine. I believed him, the version of fine that doesn't mean happy but means upright, means forward, means carrying it without letting it be everything. He ordered another round. We sat there and listened to the rain together. The word here. The one that should have been the end of the story but turned out to be the beginning of the real one.
She spent every deployment payment on a life I wasn't part of. Let me tell you about a spreadsheet. I know, not the opening you expected. But this is how I found out. Not with a confrontation, not with a stranger's phone call, not with a dramatic arrival at the wrong moment. A spreadsheet. I am a methodical person. This is not a character flaw. This is what 2 decades of military service produces. A man who documents, reconciles, and reviews. Before every deployment, I set up a budget tracker. I logged what went in, what was supposed to go out, and what should be accumulating over time. I came home after 2 years, 2 back-to-back tours, and I opened the tracker. The numbers didn't match. I didn't panic. I went deeper. Statement by statement, month by month, 24 rows of data, each one a month of my life overseas. What I found was a pattern of withdrawals, small ones, careful ones, the kind that, in any single month, look unremarkable. The kind that only reveal themselves when you lay all 24 months out side by side and trace the shape of them. Money moving from our savings into a second account. An account in Elena's name that I had not known existed. I built a second spreadsheet to map what the savings should have been versus what remained. It took me 3 hours. When I finished, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the number for a long time. Then I started on a third spreadsheet. This one mapped her movements, weekend withdrawals, hotel-sized charges, restaurant tabs in cities she hadn't mentioned visiting. The incremental financial record of a life I wasn't part of. By the time Elena came home from work, I had 4 spreadsheets open. She walked in. She saw my face. She sat down. She didn't ask what I was doing. That told me something. I turned the laptop toward her and walked her through it, column by column, the way I would brief a team, clearly, calmly, without editorializing. Here is what went in. Here is what should remain. Here is what actually remains. Here is the gap. Here is where the gap went. She listened to the whole thing. When I finished, she was quiet. The rain outside had started while I was talking and was still going. That particular late afternoon rain that settles in without drama and intends to stay. She said she was sorry. She said the deployment had been harder than expected. She said she had needed things she couldn't ask me for. She didn't name the things. I found their names later through more investigation. The second archaeology of a life that had been lived in parallel. Trips, hotels, dinners. A person whose name I eventually learned and then spent a very long time trying to forget. She had built a quiet, ordinary, comfortable life with my deployment payments. Nothing extravagant. Nothing that would raise an obvious flag. Just the normal-looking texture of a life that should have been ours, running alongside someone else. I asked her one question that surprised both of us. I asked, "Were you happy?" She started to cry. I closed the laptop. I got my jacket, my keys. I drove to a petrol station and sat in the car park in the rain and ate a bad sandwich from the shop and looked at nothing in particular. I thought about the spreadsheet, about the clean logic of numbers and dates, about how 2 years can look like a foundation from the outside and be a surface from underneath, about how a pattern only becomes visible when you're willing to look at the whole picture. I drove home, not because things were okay, but because it was my home and the rain was cold and there was nowhere else to be that night. We separated 4 months later. I kept the spreadsheet, not as evidence, not as a weapon, just because I made it carefully and it was true. And I have always believed in keeping things that are true,